This is always a 50-50 chance that I'm going to get this right when my battle buddy Rosie's not here. She is the brains behind this operation. How are you doing this morning, John?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me on, especially given we're at the cusp of Veterans Day later this week.
Yeah, I know. It's awesome. And we really appreciate that you came to join us at 9 o'clock on a Monday morning. I know that's hard for some people, but we appreciate it. So John and I have known each other, gosh, when did we first meet? Oh, at Synapse.
Yeah, probably 4 years ago at Synapse.
At Synapse at 2019. I can't even believe I remember that with my memory. But yeah, so John was in the Navy and he also is a cryptologist like me. We did the secret squirrel breaking codes for NSA stuff. And now he has, I'm not going to go too much into it because I want you to be able to tell the audience, but let them know a little bit about you, your military service, and how you ended up in St. Pete, Florida.
Sure. I ended up attending the Naval Academy, and upon graduation, commissioned in the Navy. And as you said, spent my time as a cryptologist. I had a really fun time when I was in the service. My first tour was something called a direct support officer, and so we constantly were on deployment. So during that first tour, I did between 12 and 15 different deployments on ships, aircraft, submarines, you name it. But about halfway through that tour, the head of the NSA at that time, Mike McConnell, somehow made a request that I start something for the Navy that's now called the Information Operations Expeditionary Force. And so I started a team of about 8 to 10 operators with the SEAL team unit that was located in Rota, Spain, Naval Special Warfare Unit 10. And we ended up establishing a cadre of people who would then go out and deploy with SEAL teams, and other special forces units, which has gotten much bigger over time. And then I left there and I did a second tour doing counter drug operations out of Key West, Florida, at JADF East. Now it's called JADF South, where I was the executive officer of the NSA detachment that was there. And we worked in conjunction with J2 and J3 on that command. And I actually got out because I was given an appointment to go into the FBI, and quite literally a week before my Quantico date, Congress ran into one of these funding shortfalls, and unfortunately my whole class was canceled. So I ended up being out of the military. FBI couldn't give me a date when we would have the class. It turns out it was more than 2 years later before they called me back. And so I had to quickly find a job. So I ended up taking a role with Booz Allen, initially out of McLean, Virginia, and then later on they moved me to San Diego. So, and then from there I went into big. What's that?
That's not such a bad move.
No, it was great. It actually parlayed everything that I had been doing up until that point, and I was part of the team that was supporting this. It used to be called SPAWAR, but we were supporting, I think it was PD-16, which was doing all the information protection for the Navy, along with, I won a contract with NASA Ames and a bunch of others. So it was really a great opportunity to take everything I'd learned in the military and take it to the civilian world. And then I got an opportunity to go into Big Four consulting. So I ended up joining Anderson Business Consulting, and did that for a number of years, and then joined the Fortune 500 as the Chief Information Security Officer for a $15 billion Australian firm named Lendlease. I was then hired to be the CISO and head of infrastructure for Lowe's Home Improvement, eventually became the CIO of Dell, and then from that point on was primarily an operating partner, you could say, for private equity firms. And I took on various roles from the CEO of 3 companies to COO, CMO of various others as well.
Oh, that's cool. And so how did that parlay, or how did that or how did you transition from all of that to Passion Struck? And tell us about Passion Struck. What exactly is your mission?
Yeah, so I would say that for about a 10-year period during the time that I was doing all these business positions, I had this inner voice that was telling me the path I was pursuing was not the one that God had intended for me. And I have to say, for me, it started out as small beatings over the head and then became larger beatings over the head as time progressed, that I wasn't following the path that was meant to be for me. And I think it all culminated for me in November, about this same time of 2017, prior to meeting you. I happened to go to Orange Theory, which was my normal routine many days per week. And it turns out that someone had been scouting me and my behavior. And this day, it turns out that there was a mechanical fire in the air conditioning system at Orange Theory. And so they canceled the class. So I went home about 50 minutes earlier than I normally would and walked in on an armed burglar who was at that point robbing me.
You have a dog that will bark at the robber?
Yes, it turns out that it was the maintenance person, maintenance supervisor from the rental company of the house that I was renting, and blah, 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 blah. But I'll tell you, it had been a while since I had been in combat. So when you're confronted with someone who's got a gun pointed at you, it
Wow.
really causes you to go back on that military training. And so I was able to duck and evade and get out of there. But I think looking at that experience, and then a week later, my best friend unfortunately committed suicide. And I think those two events really just caused me to take an inner look on my life and what I was doing and what I was supposed to be doing. And I came to this realization that there are literally billions of people right now across the world who are facing the epidemics of loneliness, hopelessness, and helplessness. And so, what I wanted to do was to try to do my part to serve people by trying to give them meaning, hope, and human connection, which are the three kind of alternatives to those things. And it's pretty incredible right now. If you just look at loneliness around the world, there was a recent 20-year piece of work that was done where they examined 133 different countries around the world over these 20 years. And it came to the conclusion that a third of all people, regardless of age, feel lonely. AARP recently did another survey that showed that 45% of adults in the United States are in a chronic state of loneliness. And ironically, Brazil is the most lonely place on earth, where over 57% of their population is in this state of loneliness. So
Wow.
what I developed Passion Struck to do was to be kind of an education and entertainment company focused on trying to create the most hopeful place on earth. And it started out by launching the Passion Struck podcast. But over time, I want to do much more educational videos, more classes, content, coaching to help people go from being stuck to being passion struck. And the whole thing, when I think of being passion struck, it's really living in this state where your grit and intentional behavior choices every single day are driving you to your long-term destiny that you want to achieve. And so being passion struck is never an end state. It's a constant pursuit of being your most self-realized self.
That's interesting. So why do you think that there's such a high percentage of people who are lonely? I mean, I wonder what the questions are on those surveys, and like what are the benchmarks? What are they measuring, or how are they measuring that?
Well, I can tell you one thing: it doesn't matter which political party you're part of. It doesn't matter if you're rich or poor. It doesn't matter kind of your social economic factors. I think people just are not connecting the way that we used to. And I think that our digital environment has a lot to do with this because we're becoming more and more constrained to interacting with people over digital means or social media or what have you, instead of spending the intentional effort to meet people face to face and have true human connection, which is much different.
Yeah.
And you just look at Facebook in the United States, where you've got over 250 million Americans who are on Facebook, and the average person, as scary as it may sound, is spending somewhere between 3 to 5 hours a day glued to their phone
Mhm.
in one way or another. So I think that's a major element of it. I also think that as a result of that, people, especially from the millennial and now Gen Z, uh, you know, categories, have
Mhm.
grown up with not knowing the same way to connect that someone of our generation came up with, and the generations that preceded us, and the value on it is being lessened as compared to things such as influence, fame, money, and other things.
Mm. Yeah, the whole living our life through social media thing is a huge, I think, component to that. And it's funny, 2022, getting ready to go into 2023, and people still are quite embarrassed when you say, how did y'all meet? Couple. They thought, we met online. Where I'm like, well, it's almost 2023. That's normal. Why are you so embarrassed by that now? Right? That's part of the norm. However, there's no shame in the fact that people are spending 5+ hours, living their life through social media, or living through social media and peeping on everybody, everybody
Yeah.
else's life, right? So yeah, that we are, I think, one of the greatest things that uh, we were able to take advantage of over the last few years living in Florida was that we were able to get back into those real human connections much quicker than as we know many of the other states in the country. But that's really kind of surprising about Brazil, that they're the loneliest, because I find that to be a culture just of love and the music and food and all those things.
Yeah, it was surprising to me as well. But I mean, they're not alone, and
Yeah,
it doesn't matter if it's in Europe, Asia, United States. It's prevalent everywhere.
yeah. So you haven't started the classes and stuff. Your passion instructor is right now solely a podcast.
I do coaching. I have done some classes, although we're trying to gear that up. I also have a studio where we're going to be doing much more of our filming going forward. But Passion Struck was the podcast was really put in place to test a lot of these concepts to see how well it would resonate, at least for me as a benchmark to measure how receptive people were to these ideas. And I also have an upcoming book that'll come out in 2023. And it was also used to test many of the things that I write about in the book that I wanted to get validation. And it was a great platform for that because there were areas where it definitely resonated, and there have been areas where it hasn't resonated as well. And so I was able to take those findings and rewrite chapters that didn't and double down on the chapters that did. So I think it was very fruitful in helping with that.
Well,
But
yeah, I mean, you have a shitload of followers. How many people are following your podcast right now?
a few 100,000.
Yeah,
So
obviously I follow you on social as well. And just shortly after you launched, I mean, I remember when you launched the podcast, it didn't take long for you to grow a following.
yeah, we've been really fortunate. We routinely are ranked in the top 20 health podcast and in the top 3 alternative health podcasts. We've done over 3 million downloads just in this year alone. And so it's been a very humbling experience, but to me, it shows me that the guests and the content that we're putting out is needed right now in the world, and it caused me to double down on what we're doing and trying to help as many people as we can.
And who's the ideal guest? How do you select who you, and how do you for our audience that aspire to be podcasters as well? Like, how do you go about reaching out to potential guests? I mean, I know you've had some of my personal friends on there as guests, so I think that people would be interested in that.
Yeah, so there are very different ways for it to happen. I would say at this point, it's basically an inbound flood of requests to be on the show. But what I tend to do is I like to hand select who I'm bringing on the show. And from day one, the way that I wanted to do this was to have what I call everyday heroes on the podcast, because I think someone who is stuck or struggling or doesn't know what next step they should take, it's great to bring on well-known people occasionally, and I do that. But to someone who might be depressed or might be in this state where they just don't know how to get out of it, I think is going to resonate much better with someone who was a step away from the experience that they are in and turn that around, and something that they can see as achievable yet successful, as opposed to bringing Tony Robbins on, who, yes, he's extremely successful, but that gap between where he is and where they are in their life could be too far. And so I try to bring on a lot of people who have expertise in things that I think would help people change their lives. So social psychologists, behavioral scientists, doctors, psychiatrists, normal psychologists, inspirational people who've turned their life around. And so I try to do a wide gamut of topics so that every week it is really something new, and we don't do just a constant thread of one type of thing. We've done everything this year from, I had Kara Chamberlain on the podcast, who at the age of 16 was abducted from her front yard by a serial killer and ended up escaping her abduction. Talk about, the ramifications from sexual assault and how she turned her life around. I had a Jewish Orthodox rabbi on the podcast who was abused as a child for over 9 years. Talk about the consequences from that. I've had on veterans talking about overcoming PTSD, as well as specialists who focus on how do you bring about change in your life. So it's really the gamut.
And where's your studio going to be?
Well, my studio that I use is close to Mazzaro's in that part of St. Pete. But yeah, I film most of my podcasts just from my home office.
Oh, okay.
Although
so that's the one you mentioned at the beginning of the show that you were about to open a studio, so it's already there, and
it's already there. I guess what I would like to do as the podcast continues to grow in popularity is to try to get more guests to appear live on it, sitting next to me.
Yeah.
So do that in-person type of interview as opposed to the Zoom ones.
Right. Yeah, that'll be cool. We'll be calling you the next Joe Rogan. Oh, awesome. So what else about Passion Struck can you share with our listeners today?
Well, for those who are veterans, which I'm assuming is a large amount of them, this week I've got a couple great guests. The first, which will come out tomorrow, Tuesday, is Jeff Struecker. And if you're not familiar with Jeff, he was the lead Humvee driver in the movie Black Hawk Down. And he's a decorated Army Ranger, received the Silver Star did a total of 18 deployments. But what really makes his story interesting is after spending about half of his military career in the Rangers, following Mogadishu, he felt this calling that he wanted to serve soldiers in a different way, and he became a chaplain. And so he ended up finishing his military career as a chaplain, but he is still the pastor of a church that's right down by Fort Benning, where the majority of his congregation are veterans or active duty service members. And he has a great podcast himself, but such an inspirational interview. And we will talk about everything that transpired in Black Hawk Down and then transverse that into lessons that would be applicable for anyone on not only how do you deal with things like trauma, but how do you move your life forward post military. And then my Thursday episode is with a gentleman named Scott Deluzio, who's another podcaster, but he was in the Army National Guard Infantry, spent a tour over in Afghanistan. And unfortunately, during that tour, his brother lost his life over there, and he wrote a great book about that experience. But we spend almost that whole time talking about how do you overcome PTSD from wartime or other circumstances that could have impacted your life, and what he's trying to do with his Drive On podcast to continue this discussion of how do you drive forward from post-trauma.
Yeah, so important. And I appreciate that you said from military and other experiences, because it drives me crazy that our media has sensationalized PTS as a military issue, and it's just not. I mean, you were held at gunpoint in your own home. Right after I retired from the Army, I was in a car accident, and for the longest time, right on 4th Street, someone came across all 6 lanes and T-boned me. So I'm like, are they going to stop? When they're coming from the side street on 4th Street. So yeah, that's so awesome. I'm just really appreciative of your mission and your vision on trying to help people take what they feel to be themselves stuck in this space to trying to discover what their passion is and moving forward in their life. So when we get done with this, if you can put all of your links to your website and your podcast and any contact information you want to share with our audience in the chat, because a lot of folks will come back and watch the video and
Okay.
reach out to you. Because Monday morning at 9:00, we have a few followers that will be here, but many of our audience will watch it later.
Okay, I will be happy to do that. And the other thing I'd like to just mention is that the cadence of the podcast is I have 2 guests on a week, Tuesday and Thursday, and then Friday is a solo episode. And I try to hit on topics that I am getting questions on from the Passion Start community. And so over the past couple of weeks, I did one on what are different ways that you can become more vulnerable and what is the importance of being vulnerable. Last week, it was on how do you protect success? Because I think a lot of people think a lot about how do I become successful, but we don't think about once you've achieved it, how do you protect it? Because it is so much easier to decline than it is to rise up.
Yeah.
And then this one, this coming Friday, is going to be on what does it mean to be a person of courage.
Oh, interesting.
And I'm going to use an example of a Marine Lance Corporal who served in Iraq and discuss her story, but parlay it into kind of an episode that talks about what are the qualities of what it means to be courageous, and how does that differ from bravery.
That's going to be an amazing topic. Be looking forward to listening to that one for sure. Well, John, thank you so much for joining us for a cup of coffee on In the Zone. I'm really sorry to hear about your home invasion and your friend's death. But grateful that you were able to take those experiences and turn them into Passion Struck.
Yeah, well, thank you. And if I could, the other thing I just wanted to mention is I'm also the executive chairman um, for the next couple months of FAVOB, which is the Florida Association of Veteran-Owned Businesses. And I would just like to advocate for veterans. What we're trying to do with this association is to try to get to a critical mass of veterans across Florida. So we have a lobbying group that we can take to both the state level and national level, all with the goal of how do we make Florida the best place for veterans to do business. But we now have chapters in the Space Coast, Orlando, Tampa. We're opening up one in the Pensacola area, as well as we're looking at one down south near Fort Lauderdale. But it's really a group to provide support in any way we can to veterans who either have a business or are trying to start a business.
Well, I appreciate you bringing that up because I was going to be one of my announcements today that I saw FAVOB launched in Jacksonville, and I did see something about Pensacola, so that's wonderful. I'm a huge fan of FAVOB and what they've been doing over the years. My company, Action Zone, as well as Luminary, were members of FAVOB. And as a matter of fact, FAVOB Tampa, we collaborate with them on in-person events. So we have an event called the Entrepreneur Spotlight. And what we try to do is highlight veteran and military spouse businesses, like they have a brick and mortar. We want to bring our audience to their actual business so that they can share that. And then, of course, FAVOB Tampa has their monthly networking event, which is generally a topic, a guest speaker with information that you can take away for personal professional development or to improve your business.
Yeah, it's great, and we're so we try to provide education. These monthly meetings are a great way to meet other veterans, and that's probably one of the biggest positive aspects about joining FAVOB is just that community of veterans that you get to be part of that are each trying to help each other grow their businesses and expand each other's lives. So, yep, I thank you for that.
Yeah. In other news, other things that are coming up down in Miami-Dade, they have an event called Mogul Maker in the county there with the county library system, along with the mayor's office, puts on an amazing one-day event of all things entrepreneurial goodness. Lots of information. They share resources that are available. They have a lot of free resources and opportunities for budding entrepreneurs in Miami-Dade. So you guys can check that out. I think it's November 18th, I believe, whatever that Saturday is. Actually, I'll look. November 19th. Yeah, so check that out. Do you know when the next FAVOB Tampa event is?
I think they're typically the third Wednesday of the month, if I have it correct.
I'll look it up and drop it in the chat too for everybody. But all right, John, well, thank you so much. I appreciate you sharing your story and so appreciate, what you're doing with Passion Struck. And I don't know, I think that you and I need to meet up on Beach Drive and have a cocktail soon.
Well, we live so close to each other. Well, thank you. Thank you for having me on, and for all the veterans who might be listening, thank you for risking your life for the benefit of keeping America free. I know I truly appreciate it myself.
Well, yeah, this is going to be this is a big year for veterans. So thanks for that, John. And we'll see you guys next time. Bye.
Bye.